I remember the moment I knew something was wrong. It was late evening, and I had just come back from school, my hands trembling as I wiped away another tear. The hallway light flickered above me, but what caught my attention wasn't the hum of the old bulb. It was the tiny burn mark on the wooden floor where my tear had fallen. I stared, frozen. It sizzled like acid. 2 days earlier, my little brother Liam had brushed away one of my tears while I cried during a movie. An hour later, his skin where he touched it began to blister. My parents thought it was an allergy, but then it happened again, with my best friend at lunch, with a teacher, even with our dog. Each time, someone touched my tears and got sick. At first, no one believed me. Why would they? The idea sounded insane. Tears aren't toxic. Tears don't cause nausea, blisters, or hair loss. But after my aunt ended up hospitalized with corneal damage after hugging me and wiping my face, doctors started paying attention. I was quarantined. People began calling me Medusa, as if I were cursed. Even the nurses started using gloves and face shields around me. The loneliness was worse than the illness. Because the truth is, I wasn't the only one suffering. Everyone I loved, everyone who loved me, was in danger just by being near me. What followed was a medical mystery that baffled scientists worldwide. But behind the science was my life unraveling. My name is Mia Carter, and I was the girl whose tears were poison. And if you think that sounds like science fiction, just wait until you hear what happened next. My case was classified as one of the rarest biological anomalies ever documented. What began as unexplained rashes and respiratory issues in people close to me eventually led to a groundbreaking diagnosis: toxic lacrimal elimination. In simpler terms, my tears were chemically reactive, containing high concentrations of protein-bound heavy metals and neurotoxins that shouldn't exist in human secretion. I was 14 when the first symptoms began to appear, not in me, but in others. A classmate passed out after comforting me during a panic attack. A neighbor developed skin ulcers after hugging me goodbye. And yet, I felt nothing. No fever, no aches, no warning signs. My tears looked ordinary. But under a microscope, they revealed chaos: distorted cellular structures, abnormal pH levels, and a compound that resembled a neurotoxin found in rare Amazonian plants. I was just a teenager from Cedar Falls, Iowa. No history of travel, no exposure to hazardous substances, no family history of disease. My parents were elementary school teachers. We had a garden, a golden retriever, and a small house near the edge of town. Nothing about our life was extraordinary until it became an international medical headline. Doctors from the CDC, NIH, and even specialists from Japan and Germany flew in to examine me. They ran every test imaginable: DNA sequencing, environmental toxicology, neurological scans. The only thing they agreed on? They'd never seen anything like this before. Some speculated it was genetic, others blamed pollution. A few whispered it might be psychological, but none of that mattered to me. I just wanted to hug my mom again without hurting her. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and comment below telling us what country and city you're watching from. It began subtly, almost invisibly. One morning, my friend Kayla sat beside me in homeroom and leaned in to whisper something about our math teacher. I laughed so hard my eyes welled up, and a drop landed on the sleeve of her denim jacket. An hour later, she was scratching her forearm furiously. By lunch, a red, circular rash had formed where the tear had touched her. The school nurse chalked it up to a reaction from detergent or maybe a spider bite. But 2 days later, our substitute teacher, Mr. Reynolds, collapsed mid-lesson. He had gently handed me a tissue earlier after noticing I was crying during a reading of To Kill a Mockingbird. His hands had brushed mine, and they hadn't been gloved. Emergency services were called. I remember the chaos. Students screaming, the metallic clang of his clipboard hitting the floor, the smell of antiseptic as the nurse sprayed his arms now covered in angry, blistered patches. I didn't connect it to me. Not yet. How could I? Over the next week, the pattern became undeniable. Every time I cried and someone touched my tears, they got sick. My younger brother developed swelling on his face after wiping one from my cheek. Even our dog, Rufus, who licked a tear off the floor, spent 2 nights at the vet with seizures and vomiting. That's when my parents took me to Dr. Ellison, our local pediatrician. He listened quietly as I explained what was happening. He asked if I was on any new medications, if I'd come into contact with cleaning chemicals, or if I'd been vaccinated recently. The answer was always no. Dr. Ellison suggested an allergy panel and blood work, but what struck me most was the way he wore 2 pairs of gloves during the physical exam and asked the nurse to remain outside the room. Just a precaution, he said with a nervous smile, but I could see the fear in his eyes. My lab results came back normal, mostly. No signs of infection, no known autoimmune issues, but one anomaly stood out: elevated levels of heavy metals in my bloodstream, particularly lead and cadmium. The levels were high enough to raise concern, but not lethal. Still, they didn't belong in a healthy teenager with no exposure history. That night, my parents scrubbed every surface of our home. They sent soil samples from our backyard garden for testing. We stopped using tap water entirely, but nothing explained why my tears were causing harm, nor how the metals got into my system in the first place. The turning point came when Dr. Ellison referred us to the University of Iowa hospitals. There, a team of specialists, immunologists, toxicologists, and neurologists examined me like I was a walking puzzle. One of them, Dr. Marissa Chen, was the first to ask the right question. Has anyone analyzed the tears directly? Within 24 hours, they had me in a tear collection chamber, yes, that's a real thing, where I watched as a droplet from my eye was drawn into a microvial by a robotic arm. The results were almost cinematic. Under spectral imaging, the fluid glowed faintly green. When placed on skin cultures in the lab, it killed 92% of live cells in under 10 minutes. Dr. Chen looked at me with a mix of wonder and dread. We're not just dealing with exposure, she said. Your body is producing something toxic, and we need to figure out why. After the toxic composition of my tears was confirmed, everything escalated. I was immediately admitted to a secure isolation wing at the university hospital. The room looked more like a containment chamber than a patient's suite. Sealed glass walls, filtered air vents, and a robotic arm that delivered food. I wasn't allowed visitors. Even my parents had to communicate through an intercom. Emotion became my enemy. The doctors realized quickly that crying triggered a biological hazard, not just skin reactions, but full systemic toxicity in some patients exposed. My tears had been linked to a janitor's respiratory collapse. A single drop had landed on his gloved hand, and hours later he was in the ICU with organ inflammation. It wasn't just contact anymore, it was vaporizing under stress. They installed emotion suppression protocols. I was forbidden to watch movies, read sentimental books, or speak about my family. One nurse even turned off the lullaby music I used to sleep. They feared a breakdown could contaminate the entire wing. I wasn't a patient, I was a risk. Physically, I still felt fine. No headaches, no fevers, no internal pain. But emotionally, I was deteriorating. I missed my brother's 8th birthday. I wasn't there when my grandmother died. No one could hug me. I cried silently into the pillow at night, terrified I was poisoning the world with grief. Dr. Chen visited often, always behind double barriers. She began referring to my condition as reactive lacrimal toxicopathy, a term they coined for medical journals. She believed my lacrimal glands had mutated, becoming excretory pathways for metal-binding proteins. Essentially, my tears were detoxifying my blood at everyone else's expense. One night, I heard alarms blaring. A junior researcher had accidentally punctured a tear containment vial while transferring samples. The gas sensor spiked instantly. He collapsed in the hallway within minutes, his nose bleeding. Security sealed the floor for 12 hours. When I found out, I couldn't stop shaking. I didn't cry, but my eyes burned all night. The hospital brought in psychologists to monitor me, but they were only allowed to observe through a one-way screen. They reported signs of emotional disassociation. I'd stopped reacting altogether. Numbness became my only shield. My survival depended on feeling nothing. Meanwhile, theories flourished. Some researchers suspected a mutation caused by environmental exposure to industrial runoff or contaminated groundwater. Others proposed an autoimmune paradox. My body had learned to defend itself by ejecting poisons externally. One headline even claimed I was the human chemical weapon. I hated that one the most. Dr. Chen kept pushing for answers. She initiated a full genome analysis, searching for anything that could explain my anomaly. Days turned into weeks. During that time, more hospital staff reported mild symptoms: coughing, dizziness, rashes. Even with protective gear, something was spreading. I became convinced it wasn't just my tears. Maybe it was me. Then came the night the filters failed. A storm had knocked out the backup generators for 10 minutes. In those minutes, the air circulation in my room halted. When it restarted, 2 nurses collapsed in the adjacent monitoring station. They hadn't touched anything. That's when they realized I was emitting trace toxins through my breath. The discovery that my breath carried toxins changed everything. My room was sealed entirely. The hospital installed negative pressure systems, full-body hazmat protocols, and robotic interfaces. I stopped seeing human faces altogether. I only heard voices through intercoms and saw shadows through triple-paned glass. I felt like I was dissolving, slowly, silently, into a life no one could touch. Dr. Chen remained the only one who spoke to me daily. Her presence, even behind layers of protection, grounded me. One afternoon, she told me something I'll never forget. Mia, this isn't your fault. Your body is trying to survive. It's just doing it in a way science hasn't seen before. That moment sparked a strange comfort. Maybe I wasn't cursed. Maybe I was evolving. The turning point came in the form of a mistake. A power surge caused a data corruption in my test results. The hospital's servers scrambled hours of analysis. Desperate to restore the data, a young biochemist named Ravi began cross-referencing backups with external patient samples stored in a national toxic exposure database. He was trying to find a match, not for symptoms, but for patterns in protein behavior. And he found one. Deep within a decades-old record from a remote Brazilian village affected by illegal gold mining, he noticed a child with similar elevated cadmium levels and a rare mutation in the MT2A gene, metallothionein regulation. That child had suffered seizures and skin reactions, but no one had ever analyzed his tears. He died before reaching adolescence. Ravi immediately flagged the finding. Dr. Chen reviewed the data. She noticed something astonishing. The mutation in that boy was nearly identical to mine, but mine had a second unknown protein-binding site, something no database had ever recorded. This site, they realized, was actively exporting toxins through the lacrimal and pulmonary pathways. My body wasn't breaking down, it was rerouting toxicity outward. That discovery changed the framework. Suddenly, they stopped seeing me as a hazard and began to see me as a model for studying human detoxification under extreme environmental burden. What if my body had adapted to survive pollution others couldn't? What if I was the result of something bigger, like long-term generational exposure? They ran new simulations. Using CRISPR-derived models, they mapped how my altered MT2A gene interacted with high-bond heavy metal clusters. The models predicted that, under extreme physiological stress, my system would upregulate a defense mechanism through secretion. Tears were only the beginning. Breathing out trace toxins was phase 2. The next? Unknown. That terrified everyone. One late night, Dr. Chen called my parents into a private meeting. I wasn't told the details, but I could feel the shift in their voices when I saw them next on the hospital screen. There was hope, but also urgency. A team from Zurich had proposed an experimental treatment, gene silencing therapy combined with nanoparticle filtration. Still unapproved, still dangerous. I had a choice. Continue living in isolation, slowly deteriorating emotionally, while my body expelled an unknown chemical cocktail into the world, or try something untested that could shut it all down, or shut me down completely. Dr. Chen didn't sugarcoat it. If this works, she said, we might not just help you. We might understand something that could help thousands exposed to industrial toxins. I nodded slowly, eyes burning, not from tears, but from dry confinement. I hadn't cried in weeks. I wasn't sure I could anymore. But I whispered, let's do it. For the first time, I saw Dr. Chen place her gloved hand against the glass, palm flat, her eyes bright. And in that silent moment, for the first time since it all began, I didn't feel poisonous. I felt human again. The treatment was called GenSilv 23, a hybrid therapy developed for extreme metal toxicity in post-industrial disaster zones. It had never been tested on someone with my genetic profile, or someone whose body had adapted by creating externalized toxicity pathways. It combined gene-silencing RNA fragments with gold-coated nanospheres designed to absorb and neutralize intracellular heavy metals before they could reach secretion points. Preparation took 2 weeks. My entire immune system had to be suppressed to avoid rejecting the nanospheres. I was placed in a cleanroom chamber even more sterile than before. My skin turned pale, my hair began to thin, but my vitals held steady, and Dr. Chen stayed with me every step, her voice steady in the intercom, her hand never far from the glass. The procedure began on a Monday morning. A robotic arm injected the first wave of GenSilv 23 into my femoral artery. I felt a cold fire move through my veins. It wasn't pain, it was weight, like something ancient and heavy was being uncoiled inside me. They monitored my breathing, brain activity, eye movement. Every drop of fluid from my body was collected and stored. For the first 12 hours, nothing changed. Then I began to sweat, not just perspire, sweat metallic. My skin glistened with a silver sheen, and the air smelled faintly of iron. Dr. Chen ordered full decontamination mode. The nanospheres were working. They were pulling toxins from deep within tissues I didn't even know I had. On day 3, the tremors started. I couldn't hold a spoon. My muscles twitched involuntarily. My tears turned clear, chemically normal, but I still wasn't allowed to cry. My lungs ached as if they were clearing centuries of dust. I dreamed of strange things, forests burning, rivers turning black, faces I didn't recognize begging for air. I woke up gasping more than once. The emotional toll was as brutal as the physical. I missed home, school, touch. I longed to hear my mom's voice without distortion, but more than anything, I wanted the guilt to stop. Every time I thought of someone who'd gotten sick because of me, my chest tightened. Dr. Chen noticed, and one night she whispered, "Mia, you're not a weapon. You're a warning." On day 5, the breakthrough happened. A series of real-time spectrometry tests showed a 78% drop in toxic compounds in my tear ducts. My breath, previously volatile, now registered neutral. My body, for the first time in months, was no longer leaking poison. I cried when they told me, and no one got hurt. But then came the crash. That night I went into anaphylactic shock. My throat closed, my blood pressure plummeted, alarms screamed. I remember the room going red, then white, then black. Emergency counteragents were administered. When I woke up, there were fresh scars on my chest from defibrillator pads. Dr. Chen looked exhausted. "We almost lost you," she whispered. They gave me a choice. The therapy could continue, but it would be riskier with each round. My organs were already under strain. Alternatively, I could stop now and live with reduced toxicity, monitored for life. I asked if I'd be able to go outside, go to school, hug someone. Dr. Chen paused. "Possibly," she said, but it's not guaranteed. I asked to see my family. For the first time since my admission, they were allowed into the adjacent observation room, suited head to toe, but there. My mom pressed her hand to the glass, and I pressed mine to hers. I looked into her eyes and made my decision. I chose to continue the treatment because I wasn't ready to live half a life. I wanted to live free, or not at all. The second round of Gensilv 23 was administered with more caution. They halved the dosage and surrounded me with real-time nanofiber monitoring. I was weaker than ever. My hair thinned to wisps, my bones ached, but the numbers told a different story. The toxins were disappearing, not just from my tears, but from my blood, my skin, even my breath. Each day felt like climbing a mountain in the dark. But on the seventh day, something changed. I could breathe deeper. My pulse stabilized. For the first time in months, I could taste food without the metallic aftershock that had lingered for weeks. I even laughed, quietly, nervously, but real. No one panicked, no alarms went off. Dr. Chen entered my room in person for the first time. No suit, no gloves, just a surgical mask and trembling hands. "We believe you're no longer toxic," she said, her voice breaking. I reached out instinctively, and we held hands. She cried. So did I. Nothing happened. No blisters, no burns, no gasps for breath, just silence and warmth. News of my recovery spread quickly. The media had been following my story quietly, and now headlines erupted. Toxic girl no more. Genetic miracle. Teen's body defeats poison within. I hated most of them. But one headline, tucked inside a quiet science journal, made me cry with pride. Mia Carter. A new model of human detoxification. I was discharged on a crisp November morning. My family was waiting outside the hospital, all in winter coats and scarves, holding a small sign that read, "Welcome home, brave heart." I didn't care that people stared. I ran to them. I hugged my brother so tight he squealed. My mother sobbed into my hair. No one got hurt. My reintegration into the world was slow but deliberate. I had to wear a biosensor patch for 6 months to monitor trace toxin levels. I had weekly check-ins, nutritional therapy, and counseling. But emotionally, I was freer than I had ever been. I walked barefoot on grass. I shared popcorn with friends. I cried at movies, without fear. School was different. I wasn't just the girl who missed 9th grade. I was the girl who almost melted a teacher's skin. Some students kept their distance. Others wanted selfies. But Kayla, my old friend, hugged me the first day back. "You made it," she whispered. I smiled. We all did. Dr. Chen became more than my doctor. She became my mentor. Together, we began speaking at medical conferences about environmental toxins, gene expression, and ethical care. I told my story not as a miracle, but as a warning. This isn't science fiction, I'd say. This is what happens when we ignore what we're putting into our air, water, and bodies. We founded a small research initiative called Project Lacrimal, dedicated to studying rare excretory pathologies in children exposed to industrial runoff. It was funded by donations from across the world, many from families who believed they had seen similar signs in their own children. Maybe I wasn't the only one. 1 year later, I returned to the hospital, not as a patient, but as a speaker at the opening of a new pediatric toxicology wing. As I walked through the sterile halls, now full of color and light, I paused by the room where I had once lived in isolation. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the hospital, not even to science, but to the part of me that refused to be afraid of her own tears. Looking back, I don't see a tragedy. I see a transformation. What began as a terrifying mystery turned into a journey of reclamation, not just of my health, but of my identity. I was never meant to be feared. I was meant to be understood. And through science, compassion, and resilience, that understanding came. My case taught doctors to ask better questions. It reminded researchers that anomalies aren't always defects. Sometimes they're defenses. And for families who saw themselves in my story, it gave language to pain that had long been ignored. I no longer cry toxic tears, but I do cry. Freely, fully, with no gloves in sight. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. You've just witnessed the power of narrative medicine, the way a single voice can echo across the world, changing how we see illness, survival, and the human spirit. Come back for our next story, where another incredible medical case will challenge everything you think you know. Until then, stay curious, and never underestimate the strength inside you.